friends, I'm Sarah. Welcome back to my channel, Sunset Bow Tarot. So I am doing a video today that I have been really looking forward to. So this is a walkthrough of the Herbcrafter's Tarot. I did get a request to do this. I think I talked about in my most recent monthly favorites video how much of a wonderful time I've been having working with this deck. I've been working with it now quite a lot for a couple of months, at least a month and a half or to 2 months, somewhere around there. And I've just truly loved it. I think it's absolutely wonderful. And I'm really excited to do a walkthrough and sort of talk through how this deck is organized and why I found it so wonderful to use. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started looking at the Herbcrafter's Tarot. So anyway, I've been using this deck quite a lot, as I mentioned, for the last couple months. If you follow me on Instagram, which if you don't, and you're interested in it, my Instagram is linked down in the description box for this video. But if you follow me on Instagram, you might have noticed that like for the last couple of months, all of my posted spreads have been of this particular deck. And basically, the reason that I ended up getting this one, it was kind of not what I had originally intended. I knew that I had wanted to work with a botanical deck this spring, and I had actually initially backed the Kickstarter for the botanical deck by Jessica Bott, and got that kind of last fall. And so I was planning on working with that this spring, but then I needed to order a replacement card for one of my decks from US Games. I had wrecked a card accidentally, and when I got it, they included in the package this bookmark, which I guess I've been using this bookmark quite a lot, so it's a little bit bent up, but they included this bookmark, and as soon as I saw the artwork, I was just like, oh my gosh, look how beautiful this is. It has a mermaid and a seashell in the ocean, and the person's drawing a bath, and it's just this beautiful, it looks like colored pencil kind of artwork, so lovely. So I turned it over, and it said art from the Herbcrafter's Tarot, and that literally was all it took. I went on Amazon and ordered this deck immediately because I was just so taken with this artwork. And then when I got the deck, I was just like, oh, this deck is so wonderful. I love the artwork so much. I love how it's set up so much. And I decided that I wanted this to kind of be the botanical deck that I work with this spring. And so that is how the Herbcrafter's Tarot found its way into my collection. So let's go ahead and take a look at this beautiful deck. I think that the thing that I like most about this deck is the system of it. I think that the system is really well planned out and thought out. It makes a ton of sense. I love the approach to numerology that they take in this deck. I love the approach to the elements. I love the approach to the court cards. All in all, I think it's just a really wonderful deck. So let's go ahead and take a look through it. Now, I will say it does come with a lovely guidebook, which I have been kind of poring over. And the guidebook has wonderful information. It has a full page for each card. It explains, you know, a lot about how it's selected the individual plants for each card, how it's set up the elemental associations, the numerological associations, the court card associations. Everything about it is just really well done. And it also has, you know, for each of the cards, a couple of ideas for what you can do with that herb in real life, how you can craft with it to sort of bring that energy of that plant into your life. So it's very cool. I will also say too that another really cool thing about this deck is that it has a really strong social justice focus. It has a strong focus on sustainability and sustainable relationships with the natural world, and there are certain cards where it's specifically calling attention to either social justice concerns around a particular herb or you know, the way that we might have been relating to the herb in potentially an unsustainable way over time. So I think that that's really good. It makes it a really educational deck in addition to just being so lovely and wonderful to work with. So anyway, so it's a great guidebook. And I did put the deck back in order for this video. So here are the lovely backs, and I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so we can take a closer look at these cards. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about with respect to these cards is how they have set up the elemental associations, because I think that they did a really smart job in terms of thinking about how they were going to associate herbs and how they were going to portray them in the cards. So when you start with just the majors, what you'll notice is that there's a decorative layout for these plants in all of the majors. Basically, for all of the majors, they've selected a plant that has had a long history of kind of magical uses or ritual uses, and so they've created this sort of decorative layout like an altar for each of the majors. And so that aspect of it really gives that sort of extra power, I think, to the majors. You know, there's this sort of decorative appearance of the herb. It's not necessarily being specifically used as it is, you know, kind of being placed in such a way that it gets at the meaning of the herb and the sort of, you know, ritual use of the herb. So I think that that's really special, and that's a really great way to approach the majors. And things start getting different when you get into the minors. So when you start getting into the minors, what we start to see is that they've chosen herbs to associate with the different elements based on how that element kind of interacts with that plant. And so just to get a clear understanding of it, so with the fire element, they've focused on plants where the healing properties of the plants are arrived at via the use of fire. So any plant that you might use to create an oil or a tincture or anything like that, that is where they have you know, focused for fire plants. For water plants, they've gone for plants where the medicinal properties of the plant are extracted via water. So these are any plants where you might make a tea out of them, or you might put them in a bath, or, you know, there's some way that water kind of extracts certain properties from the plant. The air plants are really depicting plants that are just sort of observed in their natural state. And then finally, for the earth plants, what they're focusing on is plants that have uses in terms of tools. So plants that you might use to build fences or weave baskets or create fabric, or, you know, any of those kinds of things. Those are all of the earth plants. So that's kind of how they've divided up the elements. And I think that that's a really wonderful way of arriving at it. They also have really given a lot of thought to how they're going to handle the individual numbers and the numerological associations of all of these plants, which I think is really cool. And so I'm going to go through these cards and talk a little bit about how they have chosen the numerological associations for all of these as well. But let's take a look at the majors first. So for the Fool, we have a dandelion laid out in this beautiful mandala pattern, and it really does get at the meaning of the Fool. I think that the dandelion, generally speaking, really strongly gets at the meaning of the Fool, but it also includes this image of a little carrying pouch that you know, you might use to carry items in as you're traveling, and it has stones pointing in the 4 directions, so it really gives that sense of potentially travel, movement, you know, embarking off on a new adventure. One thing that I do want to mention about the guidebook as well is that the guidebook is very specific about explaining what's going on in the artwork for each of these cards. The first full paragraph of each card specifically explains what you're seeing in the artwork, so I think that that's really excellent as well. For the Magician, we have the sunflower. And this is really cool because it has all of these charms for casting. You know, there's various tools. The sunflower seeds are in the lemniscate. So I think that that's a really wonderful way of, you know, showing the magician as the sunflower. Here we have the High Priestess as mugwort, and it shows like a dream pillow, basically, that mugwort is being put into, which I think is really wonderful. And so here we have the Empress as the rose, and we have lots of different parts of the rose's life depicted here. We have rose hips, we have rose petals, we have rose leaves, we have buds, and then there's these beautiful beads and a honeycomb. It really gets at the meaning of the Empress really well. Here we have hemlock for the Emperor, and I like the way that it's laid out in this sort of structure. I think that that really gets at the meaning of the Emperor. I love cacao as the Hierophant because, again, it definitely shows that there's this ceremonial use for the plant and really makes that clear from the artwork. So I think that that's really awesome. And here we have hawthorn as the lovers, and I really like how it gets at the duality by showing a hawthorn wreath with flowers, as well as a hawthorn wreath with berries. I think that the cedar is a good choice as the chariot. I mean, especially when you think about like cedar canoes and things like that. There's a lot of associations that you can get to there. We have garlic as strength, which is really wonderful. I love garlic personally, and this gets at the sort of gentle healing powers of garlic. And I love that it includes garlic scapes as well. Garlic scapes are delicious. I freaking love them. Here we have Usnea as the hermit, and Usnea is a kind of moss that grows on trees. So, you know, it really gets at that sort of feeling of being kind of deep in the forest and away from the rest of society. And I think it's a beautiful depiction that it gets out of the hermit here in this card. Here we have the kitchen garden as the wheel of fortune, and each of these individual herbs in the wheel here has a meaning. It's really cool the way that it's set up. I'm not going to go through all of it, but it gets at the sort of seasonal associations of these different herbs, and you know how they would bloom over time in a kitchen garden. Here we have justice as cannabis, which is great because you can see like it actually has a copy of the Constitution in the background here, which was originally on hemp paper. And then also the idea of justice associated with cannabis and the way that there are so many social justice issues with the way that marijuana enforcement happens in this country. And there, you know, there's just a lot there to work with in terms of justice. So I think it's a really wonderful choice. And here we have burdock as the hanged one. And I like this idea, both because of the way that they have the root almost looking like an upside down person, as well as, you know, burdock runes kind of showing, you know, the way that you can get new perspectives and new information from this particular plant. But also the idea, again, that there's this change of perspective, and the fact that burdock can both clear toxins out of the ground as well as clearing toxins out of your liver, you know, gets at that whole idea of, you know, kind of the poison being leached, that you're taking this time out to remove that poison. And I think that's a really good one. So here's the marigold as death. And obviously what we've got here is very strong references to Day of the Dead. We've got butterflies. It's so beautiful. And one of the things that I really like about this deck is the ways in which it really pays homage to the Latina heritage of Leticia Guthrie, who is the author of this deck. So it's really wonderful the way that it does that. Here we've got camellia as temperance, and camellia is actually the tea plant. So we've got tea as temperance, which is lovely. And then we've got blackberry as the devil, which I think is really cool. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and blackberries obviously are delicious, but they also strangle everything, and they push out other plants, and they create these massive, massive constricting hedges and kind of entangle everything. And so while they are delicious, you know, while you can experience a lot of pleasures of the senses from blackberry, they do end up kind of hemming you in. We have mushrooms as the tower. You can see them growing on a fallen log here. So again, that idea that there's been some kind of upheaval, but that there's new life coming out of that decay, it goes really well with the tower. The star as the cottonwood is beautiful. Apparently, and I didn't know this, but when you cut slices out of cottonwood trees, there are actually stars in the centers of the branches, which is really cool. We have Datura as the moon, and Datura is obviously a pretty powerful, it's a toxin, and it's also a pretty powerful kind of like hallucinogen from what I understand. So that's where that association comes through with the moon. And we have the sun as St. John's wort, which is a perfect choice. I mean, not just because of the color, but also because what we know about what St. John's wort does for mood. It's a really, really great choice there. So here as the Awakening card or the Judgment card, in a lot of other decks, we have Tulsi, which is also called Holy Basil. And so that's a really cool choice for the Judgment card. And here we have Pachamama as the world. And Pachamama is a deity, a mythological deity from Incan mythology that represents, you know, wholeness, completion, all of the things that we associate with the world. And then the way that they've created this mandala with different colors and different flowers and different herbs coming out of the sides, and all of the directions represented. Again, it's a really, really beautiful representation. So here we have the minors, and I'm going to go through these in numerical order because, again, the authors have really thoughtfully associated each of the numbers with a particular set of plants based on the number. in addition to that, I've already talked a little bit about the elemental associations that we have here. So again, fire plants are plants that have their properties extracted via fire, via alchemy. So anything where they're made into oils or tinctures or vinegars, things like that, those are all of the fire plants. The water plants are all plants where the medicine is extracted using water. So again, we've got teas, baths, things like that. The air plants are all plants as they appear in nature. So it really focuses on you're learning about plants. You're learning to identify them in the natural world and, you know, what their different properties are and understanding them as they appear in nature. And then finally, all of the earth plants, again, are focused on tools and making things. So all of the plants in the earth suit are plants that are used to build, to create, to make fabric or fences or baskets, those kinds of things. So that's what we see in the earth suit. So starting with the aces are all plants that we most often see as weeds. So they're plants with, you know, wonderful properties, but ones that kind of spring up on their own in the wild and that tend to be sort of the gateway to herb crafting, as they describe it in the book. They're the sort of plants that you might first start thinking, I see these everywhere. What is it that I can do with them? So we have mullein as the ace of fire. We have plantain as the ace of water. We have yarrow as the ace of air. And we have nettle as the ace of earth. So when we talk about twos, we start thinking about duality, attraction, things like that. So all of the two plants are plants that are good for pollinators. So we've got bee balm for fire, we've got mallow for water. You can see that there's pollinators in each of these cards. Chicory for air, and witch hazel for earth. So the threes are supposed to be the sort of first plants that an herb crafter would try to grow on her own potentially and work with. They're plants that are easy to grow, so it gives you that sense of creation, flourishing, abundance that you get with threes. And so we have calendula as fire, we have lemon balm as water, we have echinacea as air, and we have raspberry as earth. So fours are a card that is about structure. You know, fours are about structure. They have a sense of rigidity, a sense of limitation. And so what they chose to use in the fours were all plants that are usually used as borders. So plants that are used to enclose a space typically. So we have elder for fire. We have mint for water. We have lavender for air. And we have willow for earth. So then we get into 5, and 5 is obviously a difficult number, and it's a number of hardship in traditional numerology. It's a number of adversity in a lot of cases. And so what they've included is as 5s is all plants that are threatened or endangered in some way. So we have black cohosh as fire, we have golden seal as water, we have white sage as air, and we have slippery elm as earth. So the 6s tend to be about community and relationships between people. And so what we see in the 6s is all plants that are being used in some kind of community ritual. So we have nasturtium for fire. We have borage for water. We have cattail for air. And we have pine for earth. So 7s, symbolically in tarot, 7 is considered to be a really sort of magical alchemical number. And so the sort of plants that they've chosen to use for the 7s in this particular deck are trees, ancient trees. So what we've got here is cinnamon for fire, we've got birch for water, we've got eucalyptus for air, and we've got oak for earth. The 8s are all roots because, again, you know, 8s are a card of structure. They are a card of work. And so roots are something where it requires some effort to obtain medicine from these plants. You've got to dig them up and you've got to do what you can to get at the nutrients. So that's why they've used roots for the 8s. And so we've got ginger for fire. We've got valerian for water. I love this card. It's so beautiful. We've got licorice for air. And we've got turmeric for earth. So 9 numerologically in tarot tends to be about fulfillment. It tends to be about abundance. It tends to be about sort of arriving at a point of completion. And so they used fruit trees for all of the 9s in this deck. So we have wild cherry for fire. We have peach for water. We have pomegranate for air. And we have apple for earth. And then numerologically speaking, when you get to the 10, that's when you're reaching the end of a cycle and the beginning of a new cycle. And so for the 10s, what they've used is plants that are cover crops or composting plants. You know, they're plants that you might grow if you're trying to replenish the nutrients in the soil, if you're going to be composting them into the soil and trying to start on a new cycle of life and growth from that area. So we've got comfrey for fire. We've got red clover for water. We've got alfalfa for air. And we've got horsetail for earth. So the court cards in this deck are really wonderful. They're really woman-centric in the choice of titles for the different courts. And they also have a real strong grounding in Latina culture, which I think is really, really wonderful. So we start with the daughters or hijas. So you can see that the court cards are when we start seeing human hands in the cards actually directly working with the plants. And you can also see that the hands show the age of the person in the card, which I think is really, really cool. So again, hija is Spanish for daughter, so these would be like the equivalent of the pages. And these are all plants that are easy to use. They're very safe, and they're the kinds of plants that might be the first plants a child might start growing or working with. And so we have poppy for the hija of fire. We have chamomile for the hija of water. We have catnip for the hija of air, and linden for the hija of earth. So in place of knights, we have adelitas or warriors. And so all of the plants that you see in these cards are supposed to be somewhat controversial in some way, or be somewhat controversial remedies potentially in terms of how they're used. So we have cayenne for the adelita of fire. We have ocotillo for adelita of water. We have oregano for adelita of air, and yucca for adelita of earth. So in place of queens, we have madres, which is, of course, mother in Spanish. And so the plants in these cards, as they say in the book, have had long use as nourishing medicine. They are generally gentle, approachable, and safe. And they establish the Herbcrafter's role as a community healer. So we have thyme for the madre of fire, oats for the madre of water, motherwort for the madre of air, and creosote bush for the madre of earth. And so in place of kings, we have curanderas, and this is where you can really see age, you know, in the hands in a lot of ways. They're definitely the oldest hands that are depicted in the curanderas. And so these are supposed to be ancient herbs, medicine that might be appropriate for older women, but, you know, herbs that have a long, long traditional use. So we have damiana as the curandera of fire. We have seaweed for the curandera of water. We have rosemary for the curandera of air. I love the feather tattoos on her arms. And then finally, we have sweetgrass for the curandera of earth. As you can see, I think that this deck is absolutely wonderful. I adore the way that they've approached how they use plants in this deck. I think the structure of it is so wonderful. The way that they've done the elemental associations, the way that they've done the numerological associations, the way that they've done the courts and the majors. I mean, I think everything about it was so well thought through. And then on top of that, I just think that the artwork is absolutely beautiful. It's soothing, gentle, gorgeous artwork. It feels very organic. It's very detailed. They're very clear in the guidebook about what is featured in each of these cards. And so I think it's just a really wonderful, well-created, well-put together deck that I have loved using immensely for the last couple months. So thanks so much for hanging out with me as we took a look at this deck. I hope you enjoyed learning more about it. I have loved walking through it, and I've loved using it over the past couple of months. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment below. Please like and subscribe if you're so inclined. And thanks so much. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.